We're going to begin looking at Chapter 10, Training Programs, Methods and Principles. But to really get us started on this, we're going to look at the structure of a training program, or we might call it periodization of the training program. So what this means is that we divide a training program into three sections, and VCAR prefer to use these three. Some sports may use more within an annual training plan, so that's a yearly training plan, but we use three: the pre-season phase, the in-season and the off-season. And the focus for each of those parts of the season is going to vary quite a lot depending on the goals that you're wanting to set out. So in the pre-season, there might be a heavy load of volume. So you can see here the volume of the training is usually quite high, but the intensity begins low and increases slowly. So if someone was coming out of an off-season into pre-season, you would know from your experience that it's quite volume heavy and can be pretty taxing, designed to get some pretty specific adaptations. In season, then, the volume is generally dropped, but the intensity is maintained and is still quite high. And then the off season, the idea with most off seasons is that the body recovers, but perhaps maintains fitness. And we're going to talk a little bit about peaking and tapering as well. So what we're just going to flick to now is we're going to talk about an annual plan, and I'll give you some examples as well that we'll look through. So when we're talking about an annual plan, it's a year-long plan, and this particular one is for an 800-meter runner. So we divide the annual plans into cycles. The biggest cycle is a macro cycle here. And in AFL, for example, they might have pre-season, in-season and off-season or post-season. Here, they've been a little bit more specific within the program. But largely the macro cycle is a group of a couple of months together with a general focus. What we then do is within that group of months, we divide it further into a group of weeks, and that's called a mesocycle. And generally there's a specific focus on one or two fitness components, and we'll see an example of that later. A microcycle is a further breakdown. So we go macro, a couple of months, meso, couple of weeks, micro, 1 week or a few days. And each week will contain several training sessions. Each microcycle, or you might have 3 or 4 microcycles that make up a mesocycle. So the focus can be the same within the mesocycle because of the similar microcycles. And what you can see here is there's a tapering. So tapering involves decreasing the exercise volume, but not the intensity, so that the athlete is going to be prepared for their competition. And it also allows the athlete to undertake such practices as carbohydrate loading so that their glycogen stores are at capacity, and allows them to feel physiologically and psychologically refreshed, ready for the particular event. So let's take a look now at a couple of examples. So here's an example of an annual plan. It's a pretty general one. You can see up the top, that would be the macro cycle, so the preparation, the in competition or the transition or off season. And then we burrow down into macro cycle, or that should be mesocycles there, that have groups of several microcycles together with a specific focus. And the microcycles are the groups of weeks listed down here. I'll just show you another one down here. So that one was pretty general, but this one here is an American football yearly plan or an annual plan. And you can see they too use the term periodization, but it's a little bit different from them because they have off-season, in-season, off-season, back to in-season again. Nonetheless, you can still see that different groups of weeks have a different focus depending on the aim. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at an AFL one here. And the AFL one, this has been taken from the Brisbane Lions from 2007. So if we just look up the top, we'll dissect this a little bit. We've got our goals here listed up the top. performance goals, assessment goals, and then we go to the specific fitness components. So you can see their endurance fitness component is, and they use the terms that we use, maximize aerobic capacity and improve anaerobic and muscular endurance to be specific. So to match the position specific interval type exertion. So some really key terms that we use in our course as well. With the strength, you can see they want hypertrophy for youth draft picks, and they also want to achieve PBs for max strength tests. So have a think about the strength tests that you think they might like to do, perhaps 1RM bench or leg in pre-season. You wouldn't be wanting to build and really tax the legs during in-season, but certainly pre-season allows for that heavy load because you've got enough time to rest and therefore adapt. When we talk about speed, set personal bests for 20 and 40 metre sprint times. That's going to be really specific to AFL, and set benchmarks for speed and agility. So a benchmark would be an initial baseline test upon which you can test again. And then in terms of power, again, individual benchmarks for peak power and to establish personal bests. So they mustn't have done that before, but they want to establish a baseline. So that information up the top there really correlates well with what we're doing. What they've got then, the competition calendar, and they've listed the rounds, and then we've gone further in their the macro cycle. So if we look at the macro cycle up the top here, we've got our pre-season, and then it's been divided further into the mesocycles that you can see here with a specific focus on fitness components. During the competition phase, that's another of the macro cycles, and then they've called it general preparation rather than off-season. Perhaps that means that the boys won't, or the men might not relax as much and will still have a focus on fitness, because if you don't participate in activity for a long time, that can be really hard to get any sort of fitness back in the time that they need to. So what we've got, our mesocycle, so that's a series of weeks together, and you can see they start off with strength, aerobic and anaerobic endurance, and then they go further and they start working on power. So at the start of the pre-season, there'll tend to be more of a focus on aerobic capacity, large volume, and still building intensity. During the competition, it says maintenance here, mini peaks dependent upon form. And then you can see they taper, and they're hoping, I guess, to make the grand final there, and that's what a taper would indicate. The transition phase would be a period of rest, and then they start to build in to that general preparation. In fact, the general preparation actually goes from here all the way into here. The transition phase is actually the rest phase, my apologies. We've got some peaking and testing that they've got there and tapering, and then down the bottom we've got our microcycles. So the week here that you can see, talking about the training program or perhaps the volume, so we've got an increase in volume here, and then it drops back down to allow for adaptation, and then an increase in volume here. So that is an AFL annual plan.